So hi everyone, welcome to Unit Masters, week 5. This week we speak about stakeholder economy and how to think beyond profits. Only how can we use blockchain technology for good? And today we have with us Greg, and Greg is the CEO and co-founder of the Regen Network, and he's also a regenerative agroforester. Hopefully, you can explain to us soon what that is. And he co-authored the Regenerative Enterprise and created the 8 forms of capital framework, which is a different way of looking at how to deploy capital and different attributes to it. So hopefully we can also learn a little bit more about that. He's also a co-founder and CEO of Terra International, and he helped to grow an ecosystem of organizations dedicated to regenerative agriculture. And as many of you hopefully know, that the way to look at regeneration of planet Earth is actually very important to achieve the goals set forth by the Sustainable Development Goals and United Nations, for example. So I feel very, very honored and excited to welcome you to this class and have you share with us what we actually as a world community can do to support the initiatives.
Great. Thank you, Yip. It's great to be here, everybody. Yeah, so I'm Gregory, and yeah, I'm excited to share a little bit more about Regen Network. I live in Western Massachusetts on a maple farm here, and maybe just a brief introduction to who I am and where I'm coming from, and I guess maybe what my biases are, or what my assumptions about the world are that kind of shape my approach, and I think maybe the larger community's approach at Regen Network. So I grew up in Alaska, and that's important somehow or for some reason. And I have a background in environmental science, and my career has mostly been focused on regenerative agriculture and really trying to engage with working landscapes and farmers to sort of shift and evolve the paradigm from one in which humans are sort of extracting value and degrading landscapes in order to generate livelihoods, to one in which the value exchange is reciprocal and humans are meeting their needs and landscapes are actually becoming healthier or regenerating. And some concrete examples of ways that is actually completely possible can be seen in the emerging movement of regenerative agriculture, where you can see as we shift practices from tillage to non-tillage, or from sort of static grazing to holistic grazing, which is mimicking herd movements across landscapes, or from monoculture to polyculture systems where there's many different crops instead of just a single one. Soil health improves. Water quality improves, and of course, the carbon sequestration potential of a landscape improves. So my career, I spent a lot of time working at that nexus, first with landholders, thinking about enterprise budgeting and business planning so that they could shift from existing approaches to agriculture to more diversified, resilient, and regenerative approaches. And then eventually that business evolved into doing supply chain work and trying to support companies to be shifting their entire supply systems to be relating with landscapes in this way, that's sort of shifting, incentivizing, and supporting the farmers that are producing the ingredients that go into natural products into sort of a more holistic and regenerative relationship with their landscape and with the businesses that are sourcing from them, and then of course with the final customers. And in 2017, I sort of took a step back from all of that. My first kid was born, so I had a son in 2017, and I took paternity leave and was just kind of really thinking about some of the challenges that that the theory of change that we've been working with was presenting, namely that there's this very strange thing that happens where you could have farmers with good intentions, and you can have consumers with good intentions, and you can have brands with good intentions. You can even have logistics service providers and manufacturers, and everybody in the entire supply system can have great intentions, and it can still result in land degradation, exploitation, and a general cycle of degeneration amongst all of the parties. Because why? Why is that? Because at every stage, there's sort of systemic incentives in which every actor is forced into essentially prisoner's dilemma matrix, where, only if both actors at the same time choose to collaborate does the positive outcome at that stage happen, right? And more often than not, one or the other, even though they have good intentions, is forced to, in like the game theory construct, defect. It's like, oh, I have to pay my taxes, or I have to pay my employees, or there's always a reason why people need to choose to sort of like, not fully coordinate and collaborate. And those are systemic. Those are systemic incentives. Those are like the emergent properties of a bunch of different choices. But in my analysis of things, it all comes down to what is the money that we're using as the medium of exchange between the parties. So just taking a step back, let's talk about money. Where does money come from? What does it mean? Where does value come from? Okay, so let's just talk about US dollars for a moment. What are US dollars backed by? Why are they valuable? Well, I'll propose to you something you can consider. I may be right, I may be wrong, but in my belief is that US dollars are essentially backed by our collective belief that the US military and the US sort of economic power will continue to maintain the ability to force people to use dollars as the reserve currency for the petro economy, basically. So people are betting that that's going to continue to be the way it is. And some people may have a different opinion, but the majority of the world is betting that that's going to continue to be how things run, right? So that's what the US dollar sources its value from, is that our belief that that's going to continue to be the way the world works. Okay, what is baked into that monetary system, right? So that baked into that monetary system is sort of petroleum-driven exponential growth is the foundation of value, social value, GDP, all of these things. So we're sort of like baked into that is a whole set of assumptions that then are the game that we're all playing with each other. So that's why, in my perspective, if you have a whole supply chain in which everybody's sort of using a US dollar, you're going to every transaction and every game between every person in the supply is going to sort of get forced into a prisoner's dilemma. And statistically, just over time, you're going to tend to have these degenerative outcomes just because of the nature of the interactions. Okay, like just zooming back to sort of like, I guess like Gregory's monetary theory or something like that. So what's Bitcoin backed by? Bitcoin is backed by, again, like the network's trust that there'll be a distributed ledger that's immutable, uncensorable, and that is generated by electricity, basically, by mining. So it's backed by the mining, but it's really also backed by our faith that it's going to like work, right? And if you see the market starts to get, think that it might not happen, Bitcoin prices will drop and move up and move down. And so there's like this confidence that's happening, that's being produced. It's a social construct. Our belief that something is going to be true and continue to be true through time. So Regen Network is attempting to build the infrastructure for the unit of account that people are exchanging with to be backed by ecological health, right? Because if everybody's incentive is aligned and we're all sort of like going long, or we're all trusting, we're all betting on our ability to maintain ecological health as represented by a unit of account, that totally transforms all of these little micro games that every person in a producer network, in a supply chain, in an economy is having day after day. So instead of, so just it's a realignment of incentives, and it's a realignment of incentives in which short-term profit is aligned with long-term ecological health, right? And so this is the core mission of Regen Network, which is to sort of iterate and build public infrastructure that allows for communities, stakeholders, individuals, companies, governments to access sort of financial, monetary, scientific infrastructure that allows our units of account to be backed instead of by like the faith that the US military will force people to use petrodollars, or that miners will be able to create a distributed ledger that we can all transact with, but instead that there's a plausible reason to believe that this unit of account is backed by an ecological health outcome that has been monitored, measured, quantified, and there's social consensus behind it actually having happened, right? And so, okay, so that's a lot, but that's sort of like, the arc of my sort of coming into this, some of my biases, some of my assumptions, some of the theory behind a theory of change behind what we're doing and what Regen Network is aiming to accomplish. So now I think it's probably worthwhile. I'll do a quick just screen share and see if I can't sort of ground that a little bit more tangibly and like what our go-to-market strategies and what we're actually building, because that's a pretty lofty sort of set of things. So hopefully this little video will work. If not, I'll just walk through some slides. So let me just hit present and tell me if this works.
Yeah.
Oh, unable to play video error. Okay, well, I must have changed the files. I must have changed the file structure or something on this. So that's okay. So I want to sort of, what's going to be the easiest thing to show you all, given that that isn't actually working? So, okay, so maybe the question is, how do you create stores of value, units of account, tools whereby ecological accounting and valuing ecological health becomes accessible, ubiquitous, and baked into the financial and monetary structure? Well, we already
Can
see.
you, Gregory,
Yep.
could you go on full screen so that it's easier to read?
Sure.
That's helpful, thanks.
So I'll just sort of be speaking while this is up. People can read it. The go-to-market strategy here is essentially as follows. We're focused on carbon markets at the moment because there is an emerging marketplace for the positive externalities of carbon sequestration, to put it in sort of economic terms. What does that mean? That means currently in the current world, corporations recently are being forced to count carbon emissions as a liability on their balance sheet. They need to reduce that liability by purchasing carbon offsets, retiring them, and balancing their sort of corporate ledger. They're doing that not for altruistic reasons. They're doing that to make sure that they can access insurance and banking, lending. These are the things that are sort of forcing corporations to engage. It isn't just like marketing or sort of like, there's actually sort of like a fiduciary. Recently, it has become part of the fiduciary duty of corporations to engage with balancing carbon budgets. So that's a big booming emerging market, something like $250 billion last year. It's set to increase to multiple trillions per year as sort of like the whole market kind of emerges. That's where we're focused in terms of our go-to-market strategy, right? Because for something as ambitious as transforming sort of global monetary theory and action, so that we're, valuing ecological health, and sort of like our social construct is that, that is the source of value. You have to sort of like survive in the existing conditions in order to create the new conditions. So we're very focused on creating high quality carbon credits that are produced through whether it's sort of regenerative grazing or forest conservation or blue carbon. So we work with a variety, like we work with existing and incumbent registry systems to tokenize and bring those carbon credits into the market. But also we're building sort of this full-featured public, open source, community-owned infrastructure for claims about carbon, scientific verification, and the minting of carbon credits, basically, that can then go into the market. And that's the basic, first unit of account of a system for what I would refer to as living capital, where the currency unit of account is actually an expression of ecological health. So here we have part of the component pieces of what we've been building at Regen Network. We launched our mainnet Regen Ledger back in April. So this is a blockchain, public blockchain built on the Cosmos SDK, proof of stake, very energy efficient. It's running currently. There's validators on every continent except for Antarctica. There's 75 validators in total. So it's a very quite decentralized and robust network. That network is used for ecological claims and asset issuance. So there's a component called the Eco Credit module, which allows people to mint ecological credits. Those people that are minting are approved by governance. So it's not like everybody can show up and just be like, hey, here's a credit that represents this thing. You actually have to go through a governance process to sort of be granted by the community the rights to issue according to a registry system. So similar to Vera or Gold Standard, we have a program that is sort of like meets ISO standards for what it means to be making claims about ecosystem services and credits. Different from Vera or Gold Standard, that registry lives on the blockchain essentially, and the community governs what those standards are, so therefore how people can mint credits. Just to sort of rewind a little bit, I spoke that last bit about sort of like the registry system as if that's currently how it works. Actually, the registry program is being put on chain and becoming governed by the community. At the moment, Regen Network Development Incorporated, of which I'm CEO, and Regen Foundation, which are two entities that have legal, domicile in the United States. Those two entities govern the registry. And then we're working on getting it up and onto the blockchain and engaging a community of scientists and institutions to sort of like take it from us in what we would call progressive decentralization. So I'm going to just sort of stop. I feel like I've sort of fire hosed everybody in a rapid fire sort of fashion. So I imagine people may have questions or comments, and I'll just sort of stop and wait for guidance or feedback or questions.
No, that's wonderful. Thanks a lot. We just had a next clarification question. What is XRN? Asked Mary.
This is an old slide, isn't it? So XRN was what we were calling. I'm trying to look at where that was actually. XRN is what we used to call the Regen staking token, which is now called simply Regen.
Okay, yes. No, that clarifies. Okay, maybe before we go into the question, like into deeper questions, can you lay out the stakeholder ecosystem? Like, what are the different actors that are participating in this regenerative economy, and what is their interest? How do they actually all, get their incentives aligned using that unit of account?
Let's look back at this diagram, right? So
yeah.
In this diagram, you can see, so there's land stewards or people who are providing the service of conservation or regeneration of a landscape. There's people who are monitoring and quantifying that ecological state, right? And then there's people who are purchasing those outcomes, like in the case of a voluntary carbon market. There are people, these are companies who are purchasing carbon credits for their balance sheet. And then you have the community that is providing the public accounting infrastructure, which is built on the blockchain. And those are validators and delegators and developers, like people who are doing software development, people who are running nodes, people who are governing the system through the staking token. So this is a pretty full stakeholder map, actually, and kind of like gives you a sense of how they are relating in different ways to the shared public infrastructure of the blockchain, right? And I could sort of, it's probably worthwhile just speaking about, our perspective on public blockchains,
Yeah.
right? So we're built in the Cosmos ecosystem. Our engineering team both builds Regen Ledger as well as maintaining the Cosmos SDK itself. The Cosmos SDK is the most used proof of stake blockchain development framework in the world. There's something like 100, market conditions are sort of down last time I checked, but something like $100 billion, maybe more like 150 at this stage, even with the market downturn, secured on Cosmos SDK based chains. The vision of Cosmos, that's not a single chain, just to be clear, like Regen Ledger has its own public blockchain that is by and for the community that's interested in creating, like securing, governing ecological claims and data and producing ecological assets. So the aim is to have a stakeholder governance alignment of 1-to-1 in which the users of the blockchain are governing the blockchain. So there's other blockchains that have different uses. There's trading blockchains like Osmosis. There's lending blockchains like Umi or Kava. So you have different communities coming together to create security and governance around a public ledger that other people can interoperate with. And this creates an enormous increase in actual decentralization and in governance clarity over the sort of like one chain to rule them all mindset, which I think, for instance, Ethereum or EOS and other communities started with. I would like to mention that it is now, I believe, ubiquitous. If you read Vitalik's recent writing, founder of Ethereum, if you read other people, the sort of multi-chain or interchain world is now sort of like commonly accepted as A, going to happen, and B, important for decentralization. Yeah. So that was not commonly accepted even like 6 months ago, but we've gone through this phase shift in which, in like the Cosmos community, we've all been working on this specific, like, hey, the world needs to be interchain. People need to be able to govern their own consensus about different things, whether that's a community doing a community currency, or a consortium of banks, or the UN, or the United States, or a global settlement layer. Different constituencies and stakeholders are going to need to participate in securing those ledgers and trusting it, et cetera. And so that's really core to our ethos at Regen Ledger. We actually see a system in which people can basically create their own blockchain systems to secure the data or to govern their own systems and interoperate with us. We're not trying to like capture everything and everybody onto a single blockchain. We're actually trying to create the right sort of matrix of stakeholder representation through the blockchain system to create this kind of, in our case, accurate ecological accounting system that can lead to the world in which our units of account, our financial instrumentation, our monetary system is plausibly backed by ecological health, right? Which is, again, circling back to the big mission that we're trying to achieve here.
Beautiful mission and also vision. And so now maybe you can run us through, like, in beginner's terms, that would be important, what the Regen unit of account, the Regen token does. So let's say I'm a land steward. What can I exactly do, and how do I interact with Regen as the token and the blockchain? And then if I'm a data provider or accountant, like you mentioned earlier, data monitorer, how do I actually participate and then get my earnings in that ecosystem?
Yeah. So, I mean, Regen is first and foremost the governance token that allows the community to vote on what the blockchain does, right? What the executable logic is that lives on the blockchain. That's its primary purpose. It is also, it also pays for transactions, right?
Yeah.
And it can also be used by different stakeholders to pay one another for, you know, goods and services that are being rendered on the ecosystem. So, you know, someone may pay a land steward in Regen in exchange for an eco credit. Someone may pay a data monitor for, you know, the provision of verification around that eco credit. So the Regen is the sort of governance token that secures the public ledger. And one of the things the public ledger does is allows people to mint tokens that really represent ecological health, right? And so the value of Regen is related to the success of the community in securing, governing, and providing high quality ecological credits into the larger economy, right? But Regen itself is not trying to sort of like be, Regen token itself is not trying to be currently tightly bound in any kind of value capture way to the minting of those eco credits, right? The community may sort of find ways to sort of like create token economics that link Regen value more strongly to eco credit value. But at the beginning, we really quite strongly felt that, you know, sort of like that's actually counterproductive at the beginning. So the theory here is to provide value first and capture value second from a sort of like token economics or game theory perspective. So another interesting thing about Regen Ledger is it's quite easy for governance to whitelist the use of other tokens. So there's people innovating like eco credit backed bonds and stable coins on Regen Ledger right now. So that makes a lot more sense. Instead of paying, for instance, with a governance token that may move up and down in value and doesn't have sort of like a strong correlation between sort of the ecological units that are being produced, at least from my perspective, it makes much more sense to generate as a community sort of a compliant stable coin that is backed by the assets in question, in which the unit of account isn't fluctuating, right? So that's something that's underway. It's very exciting. You know, I think we'll see something launched next year, I hope. Hopefully that's helpful, yeah, just in terms of like what Regen is and does. So it's, people are using it as a unit of account and paying one another for data or eco credits and other things, but it's a governance token. Like what it does is it secures the blockchain and allows us as a community to upgrade that blockchain to ensure that the executable logic on the blockchain meets our purposes. Eco credit module, basket modules, the different functions that we need as a community on our consensus layer.
So there was then a question from Mary asking, okay, if we were to think of a small dairy farmer who would own like 100 cows, how could they participate in such a economy? What would they do?
Yeah, I mean, I think they would probably be producing eco credits using our Carbon Plus Grasslands system, or maybe another local methodology. So they would, you know, it sort of depends on if there's at the moment, it really depends on if there is a eco credit methodology, like a carbon credit methodology that fits their context, whether or not they can participate at the moment. So a small dairy farm, you know, so here we get into sort of the limitations of science, basically, and the limitations of our ability to effectively measure ecological health in a cheap enough way to make the unit accounting like work out, right? So generally speaking, at the moment, in the carbon markets, institutional carbon markets, the level of scientific rigor that's demanded to get a credit that's going to be purchased by Microsoft or Coca-Cola, or sort of like be acceptable in the Paris Agreement for national stock takes, you need, what we're finding is you need a minimum of about 600 acres under management in order to sort of make the cost of verification less than the amount that you're going to receive by doing the work, so that you can bring the farmer and the project developers and verifiers together to mint those credits, get them onto the market, and get paid, right? That ceiling is rapidly decreasing, and we're rapidly innovating new credit types that there are markets for that aren't the institutional markets, in which you spend less on the science, but you have surety of other things like the practices that are being made, the watershed health and other things. So there's quite an interesting emerging market there. I believe that we're going to be able to get the sort of like the land area that is that the economics work for provision of ecosystem services up into the marketplace down significantly and closer to somewhere around an acre, which I think is the goal, but that's not the current reality. Although I would say there are people working on essentially like forward contracting, where if people want to take a risk to be like, sure, I'll buy what you might produce in the future at a discounted rate now, that sort of stuff is going to come online in the future.
Yeah, it's amazing to see also what the entire blockchain ecosystem still needs to develop in terms of financial infrastructure, right? Derivatives and
there's
so
a lot
on,
of work. Yeah, there's a lot of work to do for sure. There's a huge amount of work to do.
So we have a question here from Antoine. He's asking, if I were to do regenerative agro-photovoltaics on a large scale, for example, would I be able to create an eco credit that includes avoided emissions from renewable energy production? Yeah, because I'm a solar energy producer, on top of ecological services produced on the same pieces of land. Like, can you actually earn twice?
Yes. So and in fact, the way that we're architecting this is you could earn more than twice, depending on what the claim is. So for instance, if you're making a carbon claim about the soil and you can prove that there's carbon removal, you may also be able to make a water quality claim or a risk reduction from flooding claim at the same time off the same place. If you also have photovoltaics, a forest of photovoltaics across your pasture, and you can verify those renewable energy credits, you could be earning renewable energy credits. Just like if you have the same farm and you're producing eggs and you're producing milk, you can sell both of those in the market. The same is true. You can sell multiple services from the same landscape, as long as the contract isn't double counting. So if in fact you can't sell those soil carbon units on two different marketplaces and get paid for them twice, right? But you can get paid for multiple different services at the same time.
And what's, in your view, the future where we're headed to? What are most promising and pragmatic to implement kind of data that can be tracked that represents ecological health?
Oh, that's a great question. The things that I'm most excited about, I guess I'm really excited about smallholder agroforestry based crediting systems. A huge percentage of global population, smallholders, and a huge amount of the land that's at the edges of the remaining wild land is stewarded by smallholders, people who have, a hectare or less, 3 hectares or less. And, my experience working with those people is that if we can link sort of the regenerative potential of their farms in stewarding their farms for biodiversity and for regeneration into the economic system, it will transform their personal lives, it will transform the lives of their children, it will transform their communities, and it also has the potential to do a huge amount of climate work very quickly. Like, we can sequester large amounts of carbon, we can stabilize climate and water cycles and other things. And that's sort of like a research direction. As I mentioned, either you need sort of like a large landscape to make the verification, the cost of verification rigor add up, or you need to, and you can achieve that either by having large landowners or by aggregating small landholders, which is a social coordination issue, right? And so So there's like multiple lines of research. One is lowering the cost of verification. Two is creating the social tools to work with associations or cooperatives or bring together people in a landscape to be able to sort of like engage with the system. That's all underway, but isn't currently active.
Okay. We had a question actually from another person, Slim, asking, and I think this links to also Antoine's follow-up question, is how easy is it for land stewards to record their region project impact? And then I guess based on that also, how does the Regen Network framework compete with Terra in order even to participate in these eco credit production programs? Typically, you pay a few $100,000, which you say is not very economical for smallholders.
Yeah, there's a couple questions here I'm just tuning into. So let's see. So sorry, I was distracted by the Cardano question. I'll try not to. I don't take Cardano seriously, so I'll try not to be insulting while I answer that question. No, Cardano is not the most sustainable blockchain. It is a proof of stake blockchain, which means that it's much better than proof of work blockchains. And as is Regen Network, also a proof of stake blockchain, which puts us, I would say, from an energy usage, it's probably a very similar sort of scenario. So verification process of on-the-ground projects, worldwide functioning. Yes, so we are verifying ecological state on projects around the world. We started with the Carbon Plus Grasslands credit system, which we developed sort of in-house and then open sourced and turned into a public program. All of the credits that were produced last year from that were bought by Microsoft this year. That's ongoing. So there's a pipeline of people who are grazing and producing credits into that pipeline. We also, to answer the sort of like Regen Network's framework, competing with Verra Gold Standard cost-wise. So we're about an order of magnitude less expensive while competing on rigor. So we're integrating satellite and machine learning and other sort of cost-saving approaches to science, which reduce the verification process, the cost significantly. So to get a project verified on Verra, it's usually around $2 million, right? Currently the verification cost on Regen for sort of like for carbon plus grasslands credits is more like $200,000. The aim is to continue again to like ratchet that down. If we can hit $20,000 for verification cost, that's fantastic. In order to achieve that, we need a huge database of open source models and data. So for now, there's like a large research and incentivization around the science itself. So we have a very active open science community. We collaborate with research institutions, including USDA, California SIG, Cornell, Colorado State University, international institutions, Open Earth Foundation. So there's a lot of people sort of collaborating to create sort of an open science framework to drive down verification costs while maintaining a level of rigor. I'd also note that we would prefer not to be competing with Verra and Gold Standard, really, although they're in different ways slow to sort of like engage as incumbents with the sort of like the imperative that we feel. So Verra and Gold Standard credits are sort of like grandfathered into our standard system, so they can be tokenized and come into the marketplace, be purchased, sold, and sort of like interact with our system. And then we're also trying to innovate this sort of like fully on-chain registry program in which it's really focused on open source, community governed claims and data registry system that then they can, it's open source, so then they could learn from it, they can take things that they like from it, they can, if it improves their systems, they can take that. So I don't really see us as competing with the incumbent standard systems. Hopefully what we're doing is complementing and sort of like accelerating their innovation.
I have a question that I've asked a few times, but I've never received a good answer from people I've asked this. Why do corporates actually invest into voluntary carbon credit markets? You know,
Well,
what's the main driver for people to participate in that?
as I mentioned, I mean, there's a couple of things. As I mentioned earlier, it's now widely considered to be part of a company's fiduciary responsibility to do carbon offsetting. And that has nothing to do with whether it's a compliance credit or not. Compliance credits are generated through cap and trade or tax mechanisms, but it being in it being fiduciary responsibility has to do with an individual company's corporate balance sheet. And so that includes companies that are domiciled in places that have no compliance markets, have no cap and trade market. So in the Eurozone, there is a compliance market, right? But in most of North America, there is not. There, in California, there is. In the Northeast, there is not. But still in those, in the United States, it's increasingly, like it's harder to get lending, or, you know, it's like shareholders and other people are sort of saying, this is like, there's risk associated with emissions. You have to account for it on your balance sheet. So chief financial officers and chief sustainability officers have to work together to create net zero and carbon offsetting plans. Otherwise, they'll get fired because it's fiduciary duty at this stage in like the evolution of, you know, stakeholder capitalism or whatever. So, yeah.
And then when it comes to these ESG criteria, what are big pockets that you see coming apart from carbon credits? Anything on the social side that would be measurable with data?
I mean, I think biodiversity is quickly being integrated, and we're very excited about that. I think you'll see sort of like water quality. I personally don't, like, Regen doesn't really have a social focus.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's exciting, but it's complex enough to quantify ecological state. So I defer. You could have Sean from ICSO to chat about social impact, tokenization, and things like that. He's great, and you know, the sort of like public health, and that stuff's sort of more his bailiwick, really.
Okay, got you. All right, I think it's about time to wrap up. Maybe I want to ask you, Greg, anything you want the audience to take away, like, you know, what would you actually love to be asked?
That's a good question. I mean, it's I mean, I think that the major takeaway that I'd love for people to be leaving with is just that, I guess, sort of number one, ecological assets are essential to incorporate into our economy. If we don't incorporate ecological assets into our economy will destroy the planet and society. So either we do this or we don't. And the second thing is, value money is a social construction. And so if we as a society believe that ecological health is the source of value, then we can drive that signal and reality into our economy. But it takes us, you know, engaging with that. However, it can't be done just by buying better shit. Excuse my language. It actually has to be done by committing to systemic changes, such as transforming our monetary system, such as transforming our financial system. Because if all we're doing is buying better shit, we're still in the same, like the same systemic challenges will continue to plague us over and over and over and over again, and we won't actually transform things. So you know, at this stage, whether it's regen or many of the other sort of like climate focused crypto or non-crypto, you know, projects that are trying to solve this issue around transforming monetary and financial systems to align them with ecological health, like I'm in huge favor of people investing their time, investing their attention, and investing their capital into it. And of those three, I'd just like to point out, capital is the least scarce. So your time and your attention are much more valuable than your money. So putting your attention into attempts and experiments, research, development, implementation, creating community around this sort of mission of realigning short-term economic profit with long-term ecological health is, I think, the most important mission that we have available to us. So, you know, I just encourage everybody to dive in if you have the time.
Wow, yes, and we are very, very, very grateful that you spent your precious time which with us to share your mission and to answer any clarification questions with us. So thank you so much, Gregory. We have some questions of people who will reach out to you, I guess, through your public channels to share about the work that they're doing in that regenerative economy field, and hopefully everyone can team up and work together towards preserving ecological health. Thanks so much for being with us. And everybody else, please don't forget to fill the survey, right? The reflection survey that you get sent every week. See you again, everyone, next week, and happy weekend, everyone. Thanks, Greg, also.
I just put my email in the chat if people would like to grab that. You can also find me on Twitter, and I try to be as accessible as possible. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Yip.
Have
Ciao.
a good one. Bye-bye.